So this is the inaugural 10 for the Chairman segment that we're going to do in the Los Angeles show. And this is where we take 10 questions from subscribers who their generous backing allows us to do all this community communication, work, video, and this show here, as well as the stuff that we do in Austin, like Wingman's Hangar, and the behind-the-scenes stuff. So thank you all to subscribers, and we take 10 questions every week. Funnily enough, the very first question is from 10. And he asks, I'm curious to know about the hardware setup required to run Star Citizen on full HD on max details. So that's a really good question. It's hard to definitively say that now because we're still early in the development process and new hardware comes out every year. Generally we've been aiming that the very high end of hardware now is kind of what we think the sort of mid-level will be by the time the game is fully finished. So that would have been a GTX 680 or now a 780 on the NVIDIA side, or on the AMD side a 7970, or now the R9 290X on the AMD side. And you should be able to easily run in the highest of details the game in 1080p. If you want to move to 4K, you'll probably need sort of that very high-end cards that will be available smoothly in 4K, that is, next year, or maybe current day sort of high-level to mid-high level card, but two of them in SLI. And the engine scales really well, so it can, it will take whatever you can give it in whatever resolution you give it, but you can also scale it down and it still looks pretty good. So if you don't have quite that highest end hardware, it'll still be a pretty good experience. So I hope that answers the question. So now let's get on to the next one. So Maburus asks, now that CIG is development infrastructure ready, are you planning or toying with new ideas for future projects after Star Citizen is released? Some vague schedules for bigger expansions to Star Citizen, Squadron 42, or even non-Star Citizen related project. So the answer to that is we're 100% focused on Star Citizen here, and the way that Star Citizen is being created is once it's released, that won't be the end of Star Citizen. We're going to actually planning to be releasing content on a very regular schedule. We're actually hoping to almost be weekly if we possibly can. So we'll be constantly updating the persistent universe, adding new features, locations, ships, characters over hopefully years and years and years and years. I mean, obviously that requires on people playing the game and us still being a viable enterprise, but EVE Online is still going 10 years later, so we would love to be in that same position. Then we'll also do some additional story segments, very much like Squadron 42. So Squadron 42 won't be the only single player experience we do. We will be doing additional experiences like that people will be able to play inside the Star Citizen universe. So the answer is yes, we are going to do a lot of stuff in Star Citizen, but not so much, we don't really have any plans for non-Star Citizen stuff, because we sort of view Star Citizen as it's not a short-term commitment, it's a very long-term thing, and hopefully you guys will all be playing and enjoying it many years to come. So on to the next question. Okay, Buran asks, will Radar Shadow be present in the game? So yes, the answer is yes, Radar Shadow will definitely be present in the game. We have all different kinds of sort of radar signatures you can have, whether it's sort of a heat signature, electromagnetic signature, or reflective signature. And we're also thinking of different ways that you as a player could shield yourself from someone else detecting you. So there will be an aspect of being able to sort of play sort of the stealth angle, and maybe you can shield yourself behind an asteroid, or maybe you can shut down a bunch of systems so your signature is really small, or you could coat your ship in a certain kind of armor that would give you a much lower reflective signature. So we'll definitely have Radar Shadow be part of that, and we're hoping and think it's actually going to add a lot of fun to the gameplay and nuance, because there's just a lot of different options for people to take things in space, and that's kind of part of the thing that we're pretty excited about with what we're doing with Star Citizen. Okay, on to the next one. Whiplash asks, is the plan to just make dogfighting an arena-style shoot-'em-up, or will there be some specific scenarios to test? Okay, so the answer on that is in the very first iterations of dogfighting, it'll be mostly just an arena-style shoot-up, head-to-head, or flying against some AI, maybe two teams, red, blue would be sort of the standard teams, although we think we may switch that up to be a bit more fun than red versus blue. Then maybe later on we'll do some scenarios, but the idea of the dogfighting test isn't really to deliver a fully fledged game like you would normally expect. This is really for us to sort of test the back-end infrastructure for multiplayer, the balancing of the ships, seeing if the flight model and everything's fun. So it will be an iterative process. So the early parts of any of the modules are obviously going to be a lot rougher than the final polished version is, but it's all in the effort of making the game as good as possible. So I guess bear with us on those. Okay, on to the next one. Herne asks, I'm interested to learn what Chris's personal preference is for his hands-on throttle and stick with Star Citizen. Does he prefer pitch and roll on the stick or pitch and yaw? So that's a pretty good question. Generally, in the past in Wing Commander, it's been sort of pretty much a pitch and yaw setup. But I'm playing around with the idea that we have G-forces on pilots in our sort of dogfighting part, and obviously in that case, just as a human being, you can take greater gravity in the vertical than you can, eyes out, eyes in, or in the lateral G section. So that's why one pilot will roll and then pitch if he wants to. I mean, he could do his rudder and do this, but he'll do that because he can actually do it quicker. So that would probably affect whether it would be pitch and yaw or pitch and roll. I mean, right now the default is pitch and yaw with a roll on the rudder pedals, but that may actually change to be more accurate to real playing, which will probably be pitch and roll on the joystick and then yaw on the rudder pedals. Okay, on to the next one. Ice asks, can you clarify the PvP slider? I see a lot of threads where people believe this affects the whole game, where I believe it to only affect the random encounters during the autopilot. Okay, so the PvP slider is an input to the game's matchmaking system to give it a hint of kind of like who it should be matching you with. So what happens is when you fly around in space, you have, you're in your worldview, your universe view, and the server up there is basically looking at where you are, and it's looking at everyone else and all their different machines, and basically seeing where everyone else in the galaxy, and if it feels like, oh, there's someone close to you or there's an AI that's close to you, it basically would tell your local client, okay, this person's close to you, and that person would be streamed into your instance, or that AI will be streamed into your instance. And so the PvP slider is essentially an extra variable for the matchmaking criteria. So the matchmaking criteria is on a whole bunch of things. So it's on things like ping, which is, obviously we don't want to be putting people together. There's a huge latency. It's on whether who's your friends, who's your enemies, who's your people of interest. It would have some level of skill rating in there, so we'll kind of sort of track if are you a new player or you're super experienced. And based on that, in most of the areas, because some areas there won't be any, it'll be whoever's there versus whether it's PvP or not. But if you basically said, hey, you know what, I would prefer to have more PvE than PvP, it would give a preference to the AI flying around rather than a real player. So if there's an AI pirate and there's a real player pirate, it would drop the AI pirate into your instance to fight if you were more towards PvE than PvP. You definitely would get other players stream into your space that wouldn't be hostile, say maybe a friend of yours or something, so you could definitely get a co-op kind of feeling. That's going to be an ongoing process, but the whole idea with it is you should be able to fly around the game, and if you wanted that more sort of privateer freelancer experience, that's kind of what will happen to you. It'll just be mostly you'll see AI, and then if there's other players, they'll be probably friendly players, or if you're in like certain areas of space where there's no holds barred, then it definitely could be a unfriendly player, but you'll sort of know that, okay, well, those are the dangerous areas, so if you're a new player and you don't really want to be dealing with tough other players, then you probably should avoid those. And I would like to say one other thing is you definitely can have NPCs that are tougher than any player could ever be, since it's a computer that runs it. It knows exactly where you are, and it can calculate the correct firing solution much better than a player could ever do. So I think it is a bit of a misnomer to think that NPCs aren't necessarily as tough as real players. In some cases, NPCs could be tougher than real players, but essentially the slider just sort of allows you to affect the kind of people that would stream into your space as you're traveling across the galaxy. And hopefully that'll mean that if you sort of want to play the more privateer style game, and just by yourself, you can have that experience. You want to play with your friends and sort of co-op against other AI, that can happen. But also if you want to mix it up with other players, that will also happen too. And we'll have some other stuff. I mean, I know that there's always a question where people are always worried, well, what if that's an exploit and can you change it dynamically? And we're not going to let you change that dynamically while you're flying around. So it's kind of a setting that you have as you fly around. And like I said, there are some areas that are no holds barred, and those areas will also have some really cool stuff in. So I'm hoping at some point, like you get brave enough and you get good enough, you would go to these areas to, I don't know, get this one particular kind of weapon that you can't get elsewhere, or salvage an alien wreck. But you have to take some risks to get there. So it's a sort of risk-reward basis. So I hope that answered the question on the PvP slider. Okay, on to the next one. So Roberto Elena asks, are you willing to redesign cockpits, size of displays, fonts, field of view, etc., once the final specs of the Oculus Rift consumer version are known, if you think that is needed to be playable and enjoyable with the Oculus Rift? I would say that if the Oculus Rift works correctly, we shouldn't have to do that, and we would not be redesigning ships or cockpits or anything for one peripheral that we're going to work with, even if it's a peripheral that everyone's excited about, and we're excited about it. I have a Rift sitting right on my desk right now. I will say that we're pretty in sync with the Oculus folks. We have the HD prototypes, in Austin and here in LA, and obviously the new stuff coming out, we sort of get to see it in a very early stage. And I would say that our current setup is going to work really well with it, and we're focused on making that sort of kind of VR aspect of the game work, have the stereoscopic all work really well. So I don't think we'll need to redesign our assets, or we probably wouldn't, but we're pretty confident it's going to work well with the way everything is shaping up as it is. Okay, on to the next one. Ron Miel asks, in the dogfighting module, how will ammunition and missiles be handled if there is no store or economy to reload? Okay, so the idea with the dogfighting module is that you'll start in the hangar, and in the hangar you'll be able to load up the holo table, and then you'll basically use that to decide what your loadout is on your ships, what ammunition you've got, etc. And then you get into the cockpit of your ship and you fire it up, and then the outside of the cockpit sort of, turns into the holodeck, and now you're in space. And then you fight there. But while you're flying in the dogfight module, actually out in space, you can't reload your missiles or anything like that. But between battles, you'll be back in your hangar, and then you can adjust your loadout. And that's kind of the fiction. It's sort of the fiction as you climb the cockpit and it goes into simulation mode. But that allows us to leverage the stuff that we already have in the hangar, because the whole point of this is to sort of build on game systems. So we don't want to do custom stuff just for a module. We want to do it the way it would do in the final game. Naktabar asks, but what module do you plan next after dogfighting? Care to share what you are planning? I'm guessing Naktabar isn't first language isn't English, but that's cool because we have lots of great supporters from around the world. So the module we're planning to do right after dogfighting is the PlanetSide module, and that one is the module that's more focused on down in PlanetSide environments, going into, say, a space bar or into a shops to buy and sell items or goods, and sometimes I think we refer to it as a social module, because we're going to allow, that's one of the modules we're focusing on, to let other players be in the shared space and test our MMO backend and maybe interact with other players on a sort of avatar social basis. So that will be the next module that we do after the dogfighting module. Okay, so Bess asks, is the plan to release Squadron 42 and the Persistent Universe at the same time, or will one come out before the other? Good question. I mean, from our standpoint, I think we want to give you Squadron 42, or at least part of it, before the Persistent Universe is finished, so to speak. And we're kind of toying around with how we can do this with Squadron 42 in a way that sort of falls into the methodology we're using and sort of development methodology, because I think giving you the whole Squadron 42 is just an alpha may not work as well, because it's a story, so it needs to be fairly polished as far as that goes. So one of our thoughts is to take Squadron 42 and sort of released it episodically, so before the game is fully finished, where you play the first X number of missions that are nice and well done and polished, and then the next X number of missions a month later, and so on, until you've worked your way through Squadron 42, which would lead you up to the sort of beta of the Persistent Universe. So that's currently our thinking. It's still in process right now, but we'll see. But when the game is finished properly, Obviously Squadron 42 and Persistent Universe Star Citizen would all be sort of in as part of the package. Okay, that's it. That's the last of our 10 questions and our first 10 from the chairman. So thanks for sitting with me. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much, but I hope you all found my answers useful and enlightening, and I'll catch you next week.